Welcome. Welcome to this Vebiz session on winning strategies for grant applications. We are embracing the digital format and delivering this webinar from 3 different locations. It's going to be interactive, live, so feel free to ask questions during the presentation. We have Sandra who will look after the technical side, which we had a little bit of an incident there, and please feel free. She'll monitor any questions coming through. What we hope to do in this is provide some insights into how to find and prepare grant applications. The session will be presented by
Sandra?
Or that when you do chat, please make it to all of and attendees.
Yep. Stuart, just to let you know that you just dropped out
Yes.
on the slide. So if you want to repeat that again, that'd be great.
From where, Sandra?
Introducing you both.
Okay. So I'll introduce myself and Robert. What we hope to provide in this is some immediate actionable knowledge of government grants. But before I get on to even describing myself, just give a shout out on the chat to Sandra so that we can see that everybody's can hear us. If you're having trouble, let us know in the chat, please. Great. Well, firstly, a little bit about Vebiz. Robert and I have been directors of Vebiz since 2006. We are what we call a specialist grants assistance business, with particular emphasis, though, on the export market development grant, research and development grant, tax incentive, and business productivity grants, of which we've had quite a deal of success across all three. We also look after a number of other grants for people, including the not-for-profits. Robert's an experienced chartered
Robert, we've just lost Stuart.
Yeah. Okay. If you don't mind, I'll take over a little bit here.
Yeah.
I'm a chartered accountant, as Stuart was saying, and I've been doing EMDGs since about 2000, and I've been doing R&D since about 2006. Stuart and I teamed up after many years, knowing each other since we were at school. Stuart previously worked with a multinational chemical organisation and held a number of positions in computing across a wide variety of industries, as well as managing an outback sheep station at one time and a cattle property. Working together at Vebiz has been an extension of our long-term friendship. We want the time you spend with us today to be important for the benefit and growth of your business. Until Stuart comes back, I'll just keep going with the agenda here. Moving through the agenda for today's session. Firstly, we'll look at finding a grant and knowing the people who created the grant, knowing the process, the project specifics that need to be considered. We need to understand the objectives. We need to answer the questions. And we really need to figure out whether we're competitive in the grant before we waste time and money getting there. And we'll cover funding, and we'll also talk about getting help. I think Stuart's ready to go again. Are you with us, Stuart, for the next slide?
I am, but as the next section is some of your speciality, I'll let you look after finding a grant, Rob.
Oh, good. Yes, great point. On finding a grant, government grants come from the Commonwealth. They come from state governments and even federal, local governments. What we have to think of is whether there's a grant suitable for your business. Is it a project-related grant or an ongoing funding support grant? Is it an entitlement or a merit-based competitive grant? Can you apply for generally available grants such as EMDG and R&D as well? Does your industry have specific grants? Is there an industry-focused grant or an outcomes-focused grant? For instance, industry might be specific, such as agricultural grants or clean energy grants, or overall export-related grants, R&D, innovation or community grants. There are sporting grants for facilities. One way to look at this is to consider that the government collects money from taxpayers and other sources, and they like to manage how it's spent in the community as well as how it's spent in departments. So they use the grant process to provide money to parties to do work for achieving outcomes of the government policy. Now, how does the grant fit into your other funding sources? Does it enhance or does it actually compromise your business operations? Is a grant the best option for you? Are there other options that might be more suitable, like debt or equity in some cases? You must remember that there are certain specific requirements for each grant, and you need to meet those. Is the amount of effort too great to pursue a detailed grant application? Is it worth doing all that work? In fact, in most cases, we would say yes, but it depends really on how much you're expecting to get, whether you're competitive, and whether you're willing to put in the effort and find all the information. If you know the grant requirements, potential funding availability and probability of success, is it worthwhile putting all that effort into a grant application? And finding a grant, in some cases like accelerated commercialisation, the process of applying is valuable to the business. It gives you a process to analyse what you're doing and seriously, objectively look at what you're up to. The process of the grant operations, in fact, during the process of carrying out the activities, adds to that process as well, adds to your business. So it may be more than money that you gain from an application. It may be more than money that you gain from being part of a project or a program. In some cases, the grant underlines the activities of the business. For instance, if you're doing R&D and if you're doing exports, if you're into clean energy, the grant supports what you're doing. Is the grant application a result of your business direction, or are you trying to fit the business to the grant? I think we should move on there to the next one.
Yeah, so know the people that created the grant. The grant at the first instance is created by the politicians for two reasons. One is they do have a genuine policy position that they want to advocate. The second is keep in mind that grants have a public policy purpose, and the purpose is not necessarily to grow your business. Growing your business is the side effect in a sense of what they're after, which may be more employment, more exports, cleaner energy because they are carbon sequestration. These are the reasons that they're creating that grant. The fact that your business can help them is what you need to appreciate. There's probably about 12,000 grants at any one time in Australia that are available from federal, state, local, philanthropic. The banks, etc., will even offer grants. However, most businesses will find that they're probably eligible for about 2 or 3. So once you know that what you're eligible, you need to try and get an understanding of the people and the departments that are looking after it. We do advocate that you try and make contact with them. Often that will only be allowed through an email output, and then they'll put the response to that email up for everybody to see. But often it is possible to contact the department and gain an insight into what they're really thinking, and also let them know who you are, because the same people you're talking to may well be the people that are assessing it. So if you've got some some connection with that, then that can help as they come to your grant. We've said here that you endear yourself to them. I don't know that we can endear ourselves to the politicians, and we can endear ourselves to the bureaucrats assessing it. However, what we can do is make ourselves known and let them know the genuineness and the passion that you have for this project that you're about to do. So understanding not just the guidelines, but the people that are behind it, we feel is an important aspect of understanding the grant. This was particularly so when we did a number of TCF grants going back over 9 or 10 years. The people that administered the grant also set up the guidelines, and by talking to them, we could understand and get a much better interpretation of what they were after in the applicants than just reading through the guidelines. And the end result of that, I would like to put down to the fact that Vebiz completed about 35% of all successful grants in that program over an extended period of 9 years. So understanding the people is important to you, as is knowing the process, which Rob will talk about now.
Yes, we believe that understanding the process is fundamental to success in grant applications. Make sure you understand the process and the procedure of assessment. How will you proceed through the funds? That's the end goal. How do you apply? What is the time frame to apply? When do you expect a response to an initial application? Will there be a first round of shortlisting or eligible applicants? When do you get feedback on acceptance? What do you need to do to accept if there is an offer? And what are the contracts or finalisation agreements? These are all things that you have to consider along the way, but knowing the process is important so that you don't waste time or money. And Stuart will now talk more about project specifics.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is Sandra, just to let the audience know that when they ask a question or make a comment, to make sure they ask panelists and attendees, not just the panelists. Otherwise, the audience don't see what type of questions. So we've also got a Q&A chat. So this is still a very interactive webinar, and I'm butting in to make sure that everyone can feel that they can make comments here and put some questions. There was a question that gone to the panelist about an example of how to find out about the process. What's the best way to do that?
Well, Stuart seems to be on mute or offline again. So the best way to do that is to ask somebody to talk to you about the grant specifics, ring or talk to us, and we can make contact with the department or the people running the grant program. We can certainly help go through the process of pretty well any grant, but I'd say talk to us first. We're happy to go and do the legwork and research to find out for you. You're back, Stuart?
Looking at the project specifics, we have a homily, a little guide, which is that you should have a project looking for money rather than having the money and thinking about what project you're going to do. So what we're saying by this is you should know and understand your project even before the grant's been made available, has been open for applications. Because if you understand it, you'll immediately know whether this grant's going to be suitable for you. There's normally a short period of time, normally only 4 to 6 weeks, to prepare a grant. So if you don't have a project and you've got to do all the work just to even get to the fact that to understand your own project, you're not going to be that competitive. So having a project, keeping it there, if you don't have the funding at the moment, which is why you're looking for a grant, then keep it updated, make sure that it's ready to go and be in a state that can be used to apply for. Now, most merit-based grants are very project specific, and so this is why you need to understand what it is. They will have certain aspects that the grant will want to know. They'll want to know how long it's going to take you to do it, how much you're going to spend, what your budget's going to be. They'll need to see a project plan, and more so these days, you're being asked for a risk mitigation and risk mitigation as part of your strategic plan. Now, this is a more frequent recent occurrence into the grant process. You'll be asked for your capacity and your capability. Now, we use those words often interchangeably, but they can have specific meaning in grants. And it's probably a good point to make it at this time that when you read through a grant, often you'll see the same question about a project seems to be asked twice in a slightly different way. Doesn't mean they want you to cut and paste the first answer to the second answer. The people that wrote this have asked a question and they want a specific answer, not the same answer. And the number of times that we have seen project applications put in by somebody and said, oh, I just answered the same thing because it looked like the same question. They're educated people. They don't ask the same question to get the same answer twice in a row. So when you understand your project and you understand the specifics of what's being asked, then those sort of questions make a lot more sense to you. The other thing about your project before you go for the grant application is to make sure that you could break it down into milestones. Often the funding itself is not given to you all up front. It's based on milestones. You reaching a certain point, whether it be a certain amount of expenditure that you need to make, whether it be you've employed a certain number of people, you've built enough of your infrastructure to warrant more funding. But this is the extent that you'll need to know your project at. What are the stages that you're going to do in it? So the project specific is you understanding your project and then being able to fit that into the questions that are going to be asked. Rob.
We really thought we should say a bit about the objectives, because often we have to clearly understand what the objectives of the particular program are and whether they meet your own objectives. The objectives stated in the grant requirements must be properly interpreted. You must ensure that you contribute to those stated objectives. As an example, we had a bushfire grant recently that we completed, and the objectives included recovery of obviously bushfire affected agricultural areas. That was a primary objective of the process. From a policy point of view, though, there were additional objectives, such as looking at local employment in the regions and economic growth, business growth in the regions. So that particular grant gave us more than one objective, and we had to be able to address those specifically. There may also be other general economic objectives, such as I said, creating employment or growing exports or reducing health issues. You should also consider the additional benefits provided by your project or application, which actually go beyond the objectives of the program. You need to actually go beyond those stated objectives. Your objectives, like making money or funding the business, may differ from the objectives of the grant or the government in general. But you really should try and align your objectives or your project objectives with those of the grant and the government in general. And I think we'll actually move on to the questions, which includes objectives.
Yeah. And don't forget that the objective of the politician is to get more votes. The objective of the bureaucrats is to make sure that their position isn't made redundant. And your objective is to make sure that you get the funding into your business so that you can achieve what you want, the objective of your business. So there is a marrying up of all of these things. A good case of looking at the objectives of a grant is one that's been running for about 8 years. It's lasted through 3 or 4 changes of government, which is unusual. And that's the business growth grant through the entrepreneurs program in Oz Industry. This is a productivity grant, and all they want is increased productivity. And they're quite prepared to ignore the fact that you might have to send your business offshore. You might have to decrease your employment. You might have I've often said to people, they don't care if you pollute the rivers and sack your people, as long as your business is more productive. They have this single purpose for this grant. So where you might think, well, you know, I'm going to do great things for the community and et cetera, that's not the objective of this grant. So understanding that is really important before you start, because that will then, understanding that will then actually colour the way that you look at all the following questions in the grant. There's a current grant at the moment for New South Wales in the regional jobs creation. That has two objectives. One is they want to create jobs. It's a regional jobs creation fund. The second thing is that the government wants to actually validate their strategic plan for the whole state. Now, they've developed a strategic plan. Part of what you have to do is demonstrate that you're going to be able to create the jobs, but you also have to demonstrate that what you're doing in those creation of those jobs actually fits in with the government strategic plan. So just making sure that what you're going to do, you think, well, this will be great for everybody. Have a look at what's in italics often, or in the fine print, about what else is required in the grant. And often we'll find people look at a document. A government strategic plan is pretty dry reading. We know what they want to do, so I'm not going to read it. And it is quite important. The eligibility criteria is the first hurdle that you'll have to overcome when you get to it, when you get to a grant. The first question you'll be asked almost is, what is your structure? Are you a business? Is it a grant, for instance, is it a grant that a private business can go for? Is it only for not-for-profits or local councils or state agencies to go for? But if you're a not-for-profit, can you be a partnership? Can you be a trust? We went through a period some time ago because of our constitution that they had to ask an additional set of questions because of a section of the constitution, and the federal grants actually had fallen foul of that, and they had to go back and ask everybody this additional question, make them answer it, so they actually fitted in with what the actual constitution said. So they are very conscious of what your structure of your business is. Then you'll have the problems of, is your business too big? Is it too small? Does it employ enough people or not enough people? Is it in the right state? Is it in the right region? This is why we say there's an awful lot of grants out there, but they get those that you can go for keep contracting and contracting once the eligibility for a grant comes in. So don't look at when you go through it. The first thing after finding a grant you think is appropriate, check that it is worth spending more time on. So the third, once you've got through the eligibility, which is some pretty straightforward, you either meet it or you don't, we come to the very subjective area of a grant application. And that's the merit criteria. So these grants are where you're competing against everybody else. Are you better than theirs? Do you meet the merit criteria? Now, merit criteria are normally, the first criteria they ask for is normally the most important. And these have to be answered to the merit criteria question, not because you think it's going to be really good because your business will grow and you'll pay more tax. It is the merit criteria of this particular grant. So if we look at accelerating commercialisation, the number one criteria, and it actually has 70% of the weighting for this whole grant, is whether you actually need the money. So it's not how good your invention is, it's not how big the market might be. If you can make all of those things, it can be the best invention in the world, you're going to conquer the world, you're going to have $1 billion business in 3 years' time. But if you have enough money to fund it, they're not going to look at you. So that merit criteria is very important for every grant you're going for. And obviously, like you're doing an exam, you look at the highest value marks first, and that is normally the first criteria. Most of the other things that you'll do in it are black and white, they're quantitative. They ask you the size of your business, your financials. They're things that you can't you can't change. The merit criteria is where you get the opportunity to put your passion of what your project is about into it. So once you've read through that, you and your grant writer, ourselves have done it, then we need to review it, because once you're inside a project, you get very, very focused on that and often don't look at the wider view. So we would suggest you actually have a talk to somebody else about it. And I'd go from there is, once you've got the merit criteria and you've got your ideas, are you going to be competitive to who else you think might be in the market? Rob? So
really, there are lots of grants out there where they won't have enough money. They'll have many applications. They'll have many people after the small allocated budget. So do you know who else is applying and how many others are seeking the funding? How many applications do you think there are? Or can you do an assessment of that? How many grants of what size are likely to be successful in that pool of money? Recently, we had a couple of projects where we really did well on the eligibility and the merit assessment, but when it came to the money, we were not really looked at, considering they found other projects with smaller budgets. We didn't know that at the time because they'd projected that our particular grants were actually in the right area and the right funding space. We've had success in other cases. Is the grant the right size and scope for the deliverables and the benefits? Is it competitive with other people that you think would put those grants in? Is it the right size for the possible grant offers, which is just what I was mentioning? For example, a good grant application missed out on funds availability. Many of them do. Often in the case in government, they will issue a handful of grants when it was anticipated there would be quite a few. It's more about, you think, hang on a minute, this is a great initiative. These are wonderful things that can be achieved by all the applicants. And the government's only willing to fund it to the idea of a budgeted amount, even though all those projects would have been meritorious and provided benefits. So what we have to consider is, what are your chances? Now, I'm not trying to play down everybody's chances, but we really have to be realistic when looking at it. And we need to think about our funding.
I'm not sure if everyone can see Dave. Dave's asked a question here, which I'll answer live. This is new to me, using the Q&A button on Zoom. But Dave's asked, I run a national mentoring program for young people through a not-for-profit. So if I can extrapolate on that, are there grants available for me? And our approach to that would be, in using what we've learned so far, is your national mentoring program, is it an incorporated association? Under what structure does that run? Is it set up as a not-for-profit? Is it set up as a charity? What type of young people are we talking about? Are we talking about Indigenous young people, migrant young people, disability young people? There will be specific grants. We know of the specific grants that across the not-for-profit sector for each of these categories, but also in general. It depends on what type of mentoring. Are you offering mentoring because of keeping them out of jail? Are you offering mentoring because of job training? So that will go to the objectives of the grant that you might be looking at. So it's something that each answer that you have for a grant often begets more questions, so that we can narrow down and go down to the specific response to the specific questions and the objectives of the grant that's being asked about. And a good lead in from about the funding for this type of not-for-profit grant. Most not-for-profit grants will provide all the funding for your project. They don't ask for a contribution, whereas most business grants will ask for a contribution, normally matched contribution, so 50-50. However, governments are getting also to the point where they're going for 1 in 3 or 1 in 4. So they're only providing 30% of the funding or 25% of the funding. Our advice, and I would put this as a genuine tip for any grant, that, look, the best part of a grant is you don't have to repay it. When you get it, it is a great addition to the funding that you think you've made, you think you would be able to make available. So any part of a grant is usually beneficial. When the government asks for matched funding or a contribution of some type, try and go a little bit above the threshold, the minimum threshold. So not-for-profits, it may say you don't have to contribute, but if you show you've got a contribution, 2 things happen. One is the government sees, whoever's reading this, let's call it the government, sees that you really have skin in the game, you're committed to doing it, prepared to put your own funds in, you're going to take your own risk, prepared to back someone that's going to back themselves. The other benefit of doing that is that instead of thinking that they're only going to be able to give out 100 grants, they can now give out more, which means they look better because they can actually go out and glad hand and deliver checks to more people. So your funding helps them deliver more grants. A small increase over the minimum can have a big effect in, can have a very big effect in giving you that small percentage increase that you need. It's like a sporting comp. You don't need to be a lot better than the others. You just need to be a little bit better to get to the front of the queue. So with funding, that's important. The thing is also with funding, you don't always have to have the money in the bank. So it's not as though they're going to ask you to see, have you got this match funding sitting in a bank account? You'll be asked to know where the money's coming from. Is it committed from investors? Have you got turnover that is sufficient, that is generating cash that'll be allowing you to fund it in the future? Can you access bank loans? So don't be put off by the fact that you have a large project that needs large funding. It will only become necessary, if you get the grant, but also most likely over the period that the project is going to run. So it's not going to be all needed up front. So
Stuart,
yeah.
Stuart, before you move on to the next slide, Dave has actually put some more in the chat window, which I think would be a great question if you can answer live. So he did talk about that he runs a national mentoring program for young people, and it is not-for-profit. It's actually a charity, and they offer a wide-ranging program that's not specific to a category. And it's careers training, and they measure their success by percentage of students who graduate from uni or TAFE with a job waiting. They don't discriminate. They have about 60% women in STEM, maybe 25% new Australians. And the problem that he's having is that he needs to say that, which I hope I'm getting this right, Dave, so he needs to say that it's women in STEM grants or specific, and the program costs, say, $30K per year, 60% women participation, but he's been entirely unsuccessful. He's been entirely unsuccessful in applying for 10K grants because the program is not specific to women in STEM. So this is what he's added to his question. I'm just wondering whether you would like to comment on that or maybe help Dave.
Yeah, well, 2 things I'd say is it's a really good example of a really good idea, seeing the funding there that they're trying to achieve something, but at the last moment, your eligibility fails. It's just saying here because the program is not specific to women in STEM. There are a lot of STEM grants out there, a lot of researchers, research type grants for women in STEM. In this particular instance, it would be something that we would like to talk specifically about what it is that they're doing and which grants that they've been going for, and perhaps looking outside the particular grants. To the suggestion, for instance, that if those grants are available, maybe the objective, maybe the opportunity is to set up a separate mentoring program, which does just cater for this, if that's of value to you. The other suggestions would be to look for programs which have women only in their programs and join up with them. A lot of not-for-profit grants will allow groups to join up with a lead applicant. So you can work with other people that are in the same area that have got a common objective, and you might find that those as a lead applicant would allow you to qualify for the objectives, but then would also then keep you involved and have the funding go your way. The last comment I'd make about funding for any grants, whether it be a business or a not-for-profit, is when a grant goes out, someone applies for a grant, they get the money. That money has to be spent somewhere. So often you don't need to benefit from a grant. You don't need to be the person that's being the applicant. And I make the example of plumbers. Plumbers as a profession are not prone to getting grants. A plumber to apply for a grant is quite difficult for new equipment. They can't get it. However, as soon as a water saving grant comes out, and I, as the applicant, go and apply for it because I want to put in a new tank, or I need my drainage fixed up, or there's a lot of energy efficiency grants out there at the moment where you can apply for funding to improve the energy efficiency of your business. Me getting the money doesn't solve the problem. What solves my energy efficiency problem is actually going and paying an electrician or paying a plumber to do the work. So if you're listening about grants and thinking my business could really use this, think also who your business supplies to and whether the person that you're supplying to is actually in a better position to get a grant than what you're trying to do. So that's it's a more broad look at what grant applications are about. So anyone has any more questions, happy to stay online for a while. We thank you for we have one more slide, Stuart.
Oh, yes.
Getting help. Yes, and I was just about to say, come and talk to us about your particular grant. There is no general answer. Every grant will be specific to your circumstance and the particular grant. And it may be that the one you're looking at is not specific, but we know of others that are. We don't know all the grants out there, so we don't sit here and say, yes, we can tell you. Find them and come and ask for help. And we're here to help. Often our help is a conversation with us is enough to put people in the right direction, and off they go. Often we need to be heavily involved, in which case we're more than happy to be. And as I said, the greatest satisfaction that we can get, as well as being paid, is to actually see that letter come through that says you've been successful. And I would say that is also for the not-for-profit is a really good feeling. A recent one we did was being able to upgrade a war memorial through a saluting their service grant. And the benefit, the small amount of money, but the benefit to the people involved and the benefit to the community is magnified when you see that come through. So,
Stuart, yeah. We've got a question. I thought while we're on the end part of the webinar, from VJ, he's asked, what is the success rate of grant approvals for startups during pre-revenue stage? What should the founders focus on the successful with grant approvals?
So for pre-revenue, there's depending on what your startup is, there could be specific grants for your specific industry. You could be in fintech, you could be in biomed, you could be in an industrial or a mechanical type of thing. So it depends what your startup is. Startups generally, in the language that we talk about, startups are generally referring to people that are doing something innovative. So potentially they've got trade secrets, so we're not talking about someone starting a business. A coffee shop that you've never run before would be a startup. There are no grants that I'm aware of for running a coffee shop. So startups, we are referring to innovation. The success for pre-revenue, there are a couple of grants available in New South Wales, and each of the states have something similar, have voucher systems where you can try and prove some of your technology before you've actually finalised it. And then we look at the major grant, which is the Accelerating Commercialisation Grant. And the success rate of that, I haven't seen the figures lately, but they give out about 12 every 6 weeks. About 12 applications are provided, are granted, I should say, for the accelerating commercialisation, with a value of around $8 to $12 million. So, the amount of money that goes out is about 100 million a year for that particular grant. The success rate is not high. The success rate of computing in it is actually the highest. Computing businesses is about 40%. They have a hit rate of 40% of the share. I'd be interested to talk to VJ, know more about his business, and then, as I said, know your grant provider. We then go along and we talk to, depending on what grant is suitable, go along and have a talk to them and find out whether at pre-revenue you can be making those attempts. Pre-revenue for startups is something that you need, is something that that grants are really helpful for. Cybersecurity. So thanks, VJ. Cybersecurity. There's a couple of areas there. There is a particular emphasis on cybersecurity. Your cybersecurity, for instance, if it is of value to the Defence Forces, then you could get the whole lot funded. If it's purely a commercial one, then you become a bit more limited. So again, a little bit.
Stuart, he actually said that they are a cybersecurity startup.
Yes, yeah. So that's what I'm saying. With cybersecurity, if you're doing something that the Defence Forces would be interested in, for instance, there are specific grants virtually to allow you to develop your whole application if you can demonstrate that it has a strategic benefit to the Defence Forces. If you're at a position that you've done your R&D, so obviously with any innovation, the first port of call for any business about to do any new development is to examine whether they can make the R&D tax incentive work for them. Now, I've always said that R&D starts when the light bulb goes on in your head and you've got an idea. That's when you need to start thinking about R&D. Make sure you've got the right structure. You're documenting your expenditure. You're looking at who's doing the work, who's going to own the work as a startup. So R&D would be the first one. And that's, as we've described, that's what we would call an entitlement grant as opposed to a merit or a competitive grant, that if we do the right thing under R&D, we'll get the fund, we'll get the assistance that's provided by government. Giving an actual answer, I know it sounds very political, but it is very hard at a hypothetical level. What I would say is, in terms of startups, they did run a grant for female founders, so that the business had to be 50% owned by women, by a woman or women. There will be about 30 grants given out for the first round that they put applications out for. I was expecting probably 300 to 400 applications. They received 2,200 applications. The recent sports rort that made the news some time back, that was around for the previous election, which Vebiz successfully did a grant for a sporting organisation. The issue there was the distribution of it, but for that there were 10 times as many applications as they were able to provide, and over 10 times the amount of funding was requested as was in the budget. So I have a rule of thumb to let people know that for most of these grants, there are probably going to be 10 times as many applications as successful grantees. Not to say not to do it, you just need to make sure, like in any race, you need to make sure that you're going to finish it at the top of it. Thank you. Sandra, so that's no more questions?
No, that's all the questions. Dave would like to connect with Robert.
Yes.
And VJ said thank you.
Thank you.
I've also
Thanks,
put
DJ.
Robert's Calendly link in the chat box, and so that if they can also book a time directly. But I will make sure that you guys get connected as well.
Thanks.
And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, actually we have one more question.
Yep.
From Kanadi Kasuma.
Yep.
So to make sure our grants are successful, do you say it's wise to always go for the maximum grants funding offer of our pool?
That is a really good question. I'll get Rob to come to the specifics of our recent example, and that is a really good question, because it goes to understanding not what your project is, but what the objectives are. And we had an example. I'll just cover. We're about to do a jobs grant, and the benefit there is that the government is providing an advisor. However, they still can't tell us what the size of what the best size of any grant should be. Rob.
And specifically, we were talking about the bushfire grant, where we had a really fantastic industry-changing model that was going to meet all the objectives, and it was really, it'd stand up to investor scrutiny. It would be a good opportunity to put money in for an investor. However, because it was bigger than they expected, and they had other grant applications from people in the same industry that were much more modest, our application was not considered, or not successful anyway. It was certainly considered, and it was given all the right ticks. But because it was the wrong size, it didn't fit their particular model. Now, the problem with that was that the message coming out from the original application guidelines was that we were perfectly within the space to put in the large application, the large value application. We didn't know that they were going to be looking at smaller ones in preference. So it depends. If you're going for the maximum amount in a grant, you really have to have all the things that are required and be outstanding above everybody else's application. Often it's risky because they'll basically not consider it. Sometimes they will come back and do a bit of a negotiation. If you meet all the requirements and they're really happy with it, they might come back and say, well, instead of $4 million, would you be willing to take 150,000, right? Or something, what alternative, okay? So going for the maximum doesn't necessarily give you the maximum chance of success.
Kanadi, I'd just say it's the same. It depends whether you are able to contribute to the grant. And it goes back to what I was saying about the fact that if they've allocated $1 million and someone came in and 3 people came in with $1 million, that's only 3 electorates, whether it be federal or state, that they can then highlight how good they've been to the community. Whereas if they get 10 people, that's 10 electorates. So it's I don't like to call it a game, but it's a bit of a second guessing game as to should I go for the most. So again, it would come down to, are we talking about a $2,000 grant, or are we talking about a $200,000 or a $2 million grant? And what is the pool? Each grant will have a maximum that an individual can go for, and they will also provide the pool of funding that is available. So it very much depends. Having said how hard grants are to get, our local council gives out grants for sports grants, and they appeal. They beg for sporting clubs to put grants in, because if they don't, they said we're going to have to get rid of it. So again, the question comes back to what is your grant for, and who's actually going to provide it, and can we get any history? Can we talk to the people that are providing it to understand what the history of the grant is? Hopefully they're all like our council and they've got more money than they can give away, which would be everybody's grant utopia.
There are no more questions left.
Okay.
I think you've answered them all.
So I'll go through those and have a look at that.
And Kanadi said thank you.
So
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers.